Well, hello everybody and welcome to another video. I am Sandy and I'm going to be showing you this thing that I'm calling Whimsical Architecture. You can do this with any stamp, but I'm going to be using this Art Impressions snowman. And I stamped him off a few times first with my Ranger ink so that I can stamp him onto my finished letterpress paper and have the image be a little bit lighter and thinner than it normally would be if I stamped it straight up with the archival ink. I'm going to use Inktense pencils, which are ink pencils. Once I use the water with them, they turn into this really intense, beautiful, inky watercolor wash. So I'm going to be creating a border around this image. Now I know you can't see much of the image because it is very light and the lines are very thin, and you're not going to be able to see much of what I'm doing right here, but I wanted to show you the tool. This is a very old, and I can't even remember what year I bought this. This was from my sailing days. I used to sail and teach sailing, and this has little wheels on it. So when you're using a map or a chart, as they call it in sailing terms, and you need to make a parallel line to something, you line it up and then you slide it down. And the wheels are created in such a way that they really do grip very well, so it stays really straight. I wanted to create a border around my snowman, and I didn't want it to be really regular. I wanted it to be really loose because even though this is an architectural sort of background, it's whimsical. I wanted it to be sort of freeform, even though it's architectural. I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it really does. It's going to make sense by the time we're all done. So stay tuned and keep an eye on what I'm doing, because you might think of other stamps that would lend themselves really well to this. The snowman itself is really whimsical. He's really cheerful, and the lines are really loose, and yet there's not a whole lot of areas to color on him. There's a lot of white because he's got white trim on his hat, his face and his body are white, and I wanted to really show off these Inktense pencils and how bright and beautiful they are. So I thought doing a background of some sort would be great. And originally I was considering doing some sort of a crazy sky with clouds and let that be where all the beautiful Inktense color was. And then I went, wait a minute, why don't I just do some sort of an almost structured background? And so I'm not really sure how this thing came to be in my head, but that's where I was going. I didn't have a solid plan for this when I started. Just so you know, I'm kind of making it up as I go along. You're seeing the craziness that goes on inside my head and how I'm creating this. Most of my colorings that I do on YouTube, I actually have colored first, and I've tried at least a portion of it to make sure it will work before I start filming. I've had a lot of people just say, turn the camera on when you start something. We just want to see what you're doing. So that's a little bit more of what this is. The lines were feeling a little too structured for this, so I wanted to add something else. So I took a die, and you could punch a circle as well to do something like this, and just add parts of circles. And again, I've switched pencil colors throughout both the lines and the circles, so that I'm going to, when I start doing the watercoloring, I'm going to pull in a lot of color. So with these Inktense pencils, I have a very, very sharp, they don't come super sharp in the box. They come with the little short sharpened nibs. So I went with my Panasonic colored pencil sharpener, and I really sharpened them up really good because I wanted to get into all these little crevices and make super detailed outlines around the stamp, because I really want these pencils to be the thing that makes the image pop. And after the watercolor starts, you're going to see how that really seriously starts to develop and the pop really starts to show up. So I'm adding more pencil around the image in a bunch of different places, and there's not really a rhyme or reason. I can't really explain what was going through my head other than I need a little more purple over here, a little more orange over there, a little more yellow, a little more blue, and just sort of doing a little mix-up. I wanted to make sure that the primary green, the amount of green, was bigger on his jacket than it was in the rest of the image. And there's not much red, like the really strong pure red, except in his hat and his scarf, because I wanted those to be a little more intense, and you'll see how that happens later. But for the most part, I'm just kind of randomly putting colors on here. The only colors I didn't use in my pack are the browns, because they got really kind of weird and brown. And I do end up putting a little bit of the olive green shadows in his jacket, and it came out kind of brownish, so I backed off on that pretty quickly and switched to using a brighter green. So I'm going to start doing a little bit of the watercoloring, and I have a number 2, a number 6, and a number 8 Grumbacher brush, and I'm just going to start putting a little bit of water in here and there and just see how it goes. Now here you can see where that brown, that olive green went brown in the dark shadows, so I'm even staying away from the little spot under his scarf where I had a little more of that olive color, because I didn't like it, and you can see it right there. It's just a little more of an olive color. I didn't really want to add too much of that to this image because it's so bright and cheerful. So here is where there's some more really intense ink colors. This is where I just started getting all happy, because the green didn't work all that well. I'm going to have to put another layer on it. But boy, this blue, beautiful, intense color. More intense in real life. Nothing ever really comes through completely on video. So I'm kind of stopping that blue before it gets to the circle, and then I'll just randomly, as I go, I keep washing my brush and then just putting a little more water in different sections and dabbing it off with a paper towel, because I want them to go from intense color to white, intense color to white, and let that color bounce off of having enough white in the image so that it's not super, super dark. Although super dark would be kind of an interesting idea to see what would happen if it was completely saturated with color. Maybe that'll be a video for another day. So now I'm going to move to the left side and start the same thing. You can see how intense these blues can get, and I really enjoy, just kind of watching how the color that's in that little tiny bit of pencil turns into this shape, and it really gives it some defined shape around the snowman. So I'm mostly focusing on the background because that's where all my fun color is. And I wanted to do that so that I would have an idea how intense I need to make his jacket and his hat. Because I start off with that green jacket and it kind of came out wussy. So I wanted to at least have the rest of the image to compare to, and then I'll go back and rework more on his little jacket. So fortunately, what I did discover is once the water dries on the paper, you can go right over it again with more of the Inktense pencil. It doesn't work really well while it's still wet, so you want to wait for it to dry. You can heat set it or just let it air dry. By the time I get all this done, his jacket will be dry enough that I can go back and work on it, so it doesn't take very long. I'm also not using very much water at all on any of this. I'm just, dabbing it off as well so that I don't get a whole lot of pools of water. The longer you let that pool of water sit, the more that ink will puddle, and it might start bleeding into the next section. So as I'm creating this kind of architectural thing, I almost need to segregate some of the colors in the areas where they belong so that they don't go, running crazy all over the card. But I'm using different shapes to shadow behind others. So I'm letting that purple I'm working on right there create the rest of the circle on that left side. And now I'm going to start, pardon me, my voice is going. I'm going to start working on the hat, and I've added, as you can see, a lot more intense shadows on the hat itself. So I let the pencil get really dark in these areas on the scarf and the hat so that I'll get that intense pop of color on him, because of course he's the primary thing in this. So I just put it in each one of those little sections, dabbing it off, then adding a little bit more back, trying to decide how much color I want in there versus all the other places. So next we'll start adding a little bit of shadow that I hadn't added before to my stars, because I wanted a little bit more dimension on those, because that's what he's holding, so it's an important part in the image. It's also one of the smaller, more graphical details, because I've got, all this other detail around the border, and I want to really make those stars pop. And I think now they do. So then I realized I hadn't finished all the background areas, so I'm going to go back and play with those. I just kind of keep bouncing back and forth in this. There is no real rhyme or reason. If I had done this previously and then did it again, to shoot a video, I might have done it more methodically, because a lot of people think more methodically, and maybe it would have been easier to explain. But I'm kind of glad that I shot this the first time that I did it, because you're getting kind of that organic sense of all the places where I went back and forth on this and emphasized other areas. Like here, I wanted more purple in it, and I hadn't put enough color in there. So now I just add a little bit to that corner. Just kind of doing little tweaks. I'm adding little spots of color and washes so that I can get more of these Inktense colors across the whole thing. You can color just a regular old image with the Inktense pencils, as long as it's something you can watercolor. That would be my only recommendation, to think whether or not you could normally watercolor that image anyway. In the pencil set that I have, there's certain limitations because it's only 12 colors, so there's certain kinds of images I would be able to color with this. So I can't wait to use up all of my pencils so I can buy one of the bigger sets, because these are a lot of fun to play with. So I added, for the shadow on him, I'll just go backwards a little bit. On the shadow on his snow on the bottom, I barely put any of the blue ink pencil down there so that I could get just that light shadow. And now I'm going in with the brown for his hands, and then a tiny, tiny bit of black to add a little bit of detail. There's a black pencil in here that I'm just adding the super deep shadows, and then I'll just go in with a tiny touch of watercolor on them. And I'm not going to do a whole lot else other than, affirming that line. So here on the finished card, you can see that those really deep shadows made a big difference in making the focus come back to the snowman and creating that really intense color right around him. I love doing crazy things like this, completely out of the norm for me. If you want to watch more of my crazy videos, please click on one of these, check those out, and leave me a comment in the doobly-doo what you thought, and I will see you next time. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.